Welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, episode 192, Music Literacy for All, Debunking Myths and Embracing Diversity. In this episode, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be reading from and discussing some written word produced by Choralosophy Podcast on our new blog site, Choralosophy Community. It's at the same address that the newsletter has been for the last few months. You can find it at choralosophy.substack.com, but now, instead of just a newsletter, you're going to have access to contributors who want to join the conversation outside of just podcast format, which could cater to some really interesting additions to our conversation and some opinions. Oftentimes, I offer opinions here as well, but opinions that come from people other than me. So in this episode, you're going to hear from Odell Zeigler about his response to the Choral Journal's article that was essentially about him and his presentation, referring to whether or not we should sight read as part of our all-state auditions and assumptions that would also trickle into other areas of our music assessments and remove the literacy importance from those auditions. Odell responds eloquently at choralosophy.substack.com. I'm also going to be reading from a blog that was anonymously created from a conversation that I had with a college music ed professor who was not comfortable being identified, so stick around for that. This excerpt can be found in its full form on the Choralosophy community for people who don't always listen to podcasts and who'd really like to read, so I'm really excited about this. Are you tired of managing multiple platforms to sell tickets, fundraise, and market your performances? Look no further than Ludus.com, an all-in-one solution that's easy to use and free to your organization. With Ludus, you'll have access to a suite of tools and resources specifically designed for the performing arts. From ticket sales to merchandise and fundraising, Ludus has got you covered. So why not give it a try? Save time, money, and resources. Choralosophy listeners can go to ludus.com/choralosophy for an upgrade for free to their marketing suite. In this article, Odell has the opportunity to respond to the Choral Journal article that we discussed in episode 184 that advocated for the elimination of sight singing from all-state choir and other such audition processes due to the fact that they are exclusionary, center whiteness, and a variety of other things. Well, that article actually was centered around a presentation that is described in the article and not really mentioning who the presenter was. Well, we have that presenter here telling his side of the story. So this is an excerpt from Odell's article, which was just published this last week at choralosophy.substack.com. You can read it there, or you can read it in the show notes of this episode. And of course, I would encourage you to go to the Substack and sign up for that free newsletter and future blogs from other contributors that are coming very soon. In April of 2023, I was fortunate to present an unconventional approach to the urban chorus classroom at the NAfME Eastern Division Conference, which was held in Rochester, New York. The objective of my presentation is that participants will be able to recognize their own challenges in the urban choral setting and combat them by implementing unconventional or modified strategies to foster music literacy growth and success in their programs. My presentation speaks on today's myths and barriers in urban education related to literacy in music education. I wholeheartedly believe in the mantra that is presented on Choralosophy, namely that literacy is equity. I highlight issues new choral directors may experience starting in the urban classroom. Notably, I offer suggestions and pedagogical tips to bring success to their programs. The goal is to highlight music literacy as a whole and encourage teachers to give all students access to music literacy instruction. The unconventional part of the presentation speaks about the various routes to engage students in the classical style of choral music if they are unfamiliar with it. It speaks on unconventionality as a jumpstart to the main goal, music literacy. In this manner, we begin to debunk myths and embrace diversity for all learners. I alluded to the idea that it is not equitable for minority learners not to learn how to read music. At any rate, I was alarmed to see the February 2024 issue of Choral Journal Online, which featured an article titled A Skills-First Approach to the All-State Choir Selection Process by Dr. Marshawn Hyman, who, as I mentioned, was on this show on episode 184. The title grabbed my attention, so I began reading the article. After reading the first paragraph, I quickly identified the author before I jumped to conclusions. After discovering who the author was, I knew the article was about my presentation and my philosophy of music education. read the rest of Odell's fantastic article at choralosophy.substack.com. And of course, the platform is growing. We are expanding into new initiatives. I would really also love to have you join me in Kansas City to sing with the Contra IKC Choral Scholars, June 26th to June 30th. If you want to get signed up for that, you can. I will put the link in the show notes, as well as you can just head over to contraikc.com and find the enrollment information there. So by the time you hear this episode, the article will already be out, and as the moment I'm recording this, I'm already looking on Facebook, and Odell has sparked a conversation, which of course is the mission of this show and this platform now, is to start important conversations. If the important conversations aren't happening, we're going to try to start them here, and if people don't kind of want to talk about it because it makes them uncomfortable, we're going to force that conversation. And I find that this literacy discussion is a hornet's nest that has been kicked over. So, for example, I'm getting comments on some of these threads for this blog already that highlight some of the misunderstanding that I think Odell and I have been trying to communicate, which is, namely, that yes, music is made outside of school primarily in ways that do not require written notation or the reading of notation. And somehow in our conversations about diversity, we have conflated these things as needing to, that a diverse classroom needs to expose kids to all aspects of music. And I'm just going to remind folks that that's not a fair expectation for teachers. We have a small amount of time. We actually have to decide the things that matter. And I can tell you, as somebody who I would call myself an expert in teaching kids to read music fluently, I've been doing it for years, above and beyond what is typical in the choral profession. And I can tell you, you can't do it if it's just one of the many things that you teach. You in order to teach fluent reading, you need to do it every day. And it also needs to be the way that you learn music, the way that the kids learn their repertoire for performance needs to be the same way they read at the beginning of class in their literacy lessons. They need to see it as relevant, and they need to work on it in some capacity almost all class period long every day. So if what we're going to say, and this was a comment directly off of one of these threads, if we're going to have a comment like, well, there's tension between school music and diversity concepts because you might go to a music studio in Nashville or a jazz club in New Orleans or a church that does gospel music, and you might find musicians there who don't read music. And I'm very confused what this has to do with school music. And this has been a conflict that has been aired out on this show for 5 years now. It was actually one of the very first topics that we encountered way back in the first 10 or 15 episodes of the show. This has already started to come up, which is that my point that I've been trying to make is that there are lots of beautiful and amazingly diverse ways that people make music around the world. But in those examples, a studio musician, a church that does gospel music by rote, by ear, variety of other types of environments where music notation is not used. Who is it that is doing those music-making leaderships? They are people who are identified oftentimes at a young age as being musically talented. What we're talking about in school, though, are giving kids tools of all ability levels. So not every kid can pick up a guitar and just learn to play by ear. Some people are smart enough to do that, and there's a musical gift that happens, and talent does exist. I don't know of any pedagogies that are out there that design a curriculum based on the idea that someone could pick up an instrument that they've never been taught to play. Those tend to be people who are anointed, so to speak. They have that gift. I've met many of them in my life. I was not one of them. I needed to be taught how to do it. And I think that's where this dividing line has to happen philosophically. We are a profession that is built around teaching kids regardless of their prior talent or prior content knowledge, right? So there are some types of music, like gospel, like jazz, like many folk genres that don't use notation, and in many ways that's good, and schools should keep their grubby paws off of those traditions. because if we try to curricularize them, we would ruin them. And I think that's where the distinction is for me. Should we teach our students about as many forms of music as possible? Yes, we should. Should I be made to feel guilty because my choral classroom is not as adept in jazz improvisational theory as someone says that they should be, and so that I can be saying that it's a diverse classroom? No, because the choral art form is plenty diverse as it is. Choirs can sing music from almost any place and time in the world. I would say that the choir as an instrument is already probably one of the most diverse instruments that there is. We don't need to mess with it. It is already a powerful tool. But if we're going to nitpick around the edges of like all the different types of music we're not teaching when we teach a choral curriculum, then I think we are too in the weeds. And if that is your position, then I'm sorry, I'm just going to disagree with you. And I think the position Odell is articulating in this article is very related to this, which is that if you're going to be a musician learning music in school for an academic setting, to go to college, to get a scholarship, to be a music teacher or whatever it is, learning to read music is something you need to overcome disadvantages that you might have had in life. So if you're in an urban classroom, if you're in a poverty-stricken area, those skills are the things you can give to students to level the playing field. In fact, that is what literacy is equity is all about. As the programs and resources expand here at Choralosophy, the need for support also grows. I really want to keep everything that we produce free for as long as possible. I don't want people to have to pay to listen to the podcast. I don't want people to have to pay to read the blogs. So what ends up helping the most is when people decide to pay anyway. And that's essentially what you can do at Patreon or on Substack. You will see a button that allows you the opportunity to subscribe rather than doing it for free because you value what it is that we're doing here at Choralosophy and you want to see it continue. So you now have two options. You can go to patreon.com/Choralosophy, where most of the folks are because I've been doing that for years, or right there on Substack as you read these articles and as you share them with your friends. Those are two ways you can support the show. It's really just to keep this show going and underwrite all of its recurring production costs. The producers and inner circle at Patreon are Brannigan Lawrence, Brian Long, Chandler Smith, Venture Studios, Jonah Clicksbull, Angie Schilling, David Kowalczyk, DF, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, Ryan Main, and Stephen Kathy Kakachik. So Choralosophy Community has 2 blogs out so far. More are coming, but the first blog that was released actually a few weeks before this episode has already made a stir as well, and that was called The Higher Ed Problems That Shall Not Be Named. And it stemmed from an episode on this show with Dr. Jeffrey Murdoch, who brought up some issues related to expertise in choral music and how we determine it. And for many years also, we've been discussing in circles on this page and at Choralosopher's Facebook page, there's been many conversations over the years now about this sense of from where do we derive our credentials as choral educators and as choir directors. How much does it matter that our choirs sound good? How much does it matter that our pedagogy is sound? How much does it matter that our programs are growing, that our choirs sound fantastic, that we are teaching kids to do things, that we are teaching kids and adults how to do things they didn't know how to do before and building confident communities around singing? How much of that professional work factors into the rubric of whether or not we get asked to be a presenter at a convention or to direct an honor choir or to be considered an expert on a topic within our profession? Because there have been many that have criticized the hierarchy as being too heavily weighted on what degree you have. Does the degree you have automatically confer expertise upon you? I would say no. I've known too many people with the terminal degree in our profession who are terrible in front of choirs. I've known way too many who have bad choirs, and they still have the terminal degree. I've known too many with the terminal degree who are marginal musicians. So we need to come up with some type of a rubric that, yes, includes education and how much education we've received, but also has includes these other aspects of our profession that we can evaluate based on the merit of the work. Are we going to all agree on what meritocratic work looks like and sounds like? No, but that doesn't mean we don't make an attempt. And so in this blog, you're going to hear a conversation read, a portion of it, between myself and a music ed professor who wants to be kept anonymous, partly because this professor is worried about this very ecosystem that we are discussing. In this ecosystem, there are folks that don't want to say what they want to say on a regular basis. In fact, I hear from them as in my back channels on this show all of the time. Thank you for saying XYZ because I work in higher ed and I can't say that, but I wish I could say those things. This happens all the time. And so this conversation is important. We criticize and we go back and forth some of these issues in the ecosystem, including degree inflation, the issue of people teaching other people to teach when they have barely taught, and much, much more. So stick around for some excerpts. And of course, you can also read the rest of this at choralosophy.substack.com. I think it's important to understand that PhD versus classroom teacher are not a hierarchical structure. It's a symbiotic relationship. Classroom teachers are real work practitioners. Researchers try to understand problems and create solutions through a scientific lens. Each should understand their value and strengths and respect the position of the other. This is a quote from the beginning of the article from a Facebook thread that generated this article. But when the Facebook thread was going, I got a private message from a professor that would like to say something, but did not feel comfortable saying it with the name attached. So it was made anonymous, and certain details of the article are sanitized, so to speak, to protect the identity of the professor. So in this excerpt, I will simply refer to the professor as Prof. I don't know if I want to wade into the comments and get flamed by my higher ed colleagues, but being able to teach well is treated as a side quest in the higher ed world, which in an area like education seems antithetical. But that's the reality. It's a different career entirely, and I'm still coming to terms with that as one of the outliers who spent a significant number of years teaching before moving to higher ed. Very few teachers with experience or a family are willing to take the pay cut and go more into debt for terminal degree and move locations to teach college, so way too many college professors have 5 or less years of K-12 experience. I'll tell a lot of people that my PhD didn't make me a better teacher because that wasn't the purpose, but it's a piece of paper that says I'm pretty good at looking things up and answering questions. Teaching is what I learned how to do before that. So I'm going to pause there. Now I'm speaking. I'm not reading anymore. So that if you're a listener, you can know what's going on. So that first statement just floored me because my first thought was all of those things are so obviously true that this professor said. But then my jaw was on the floor because I couldn't help but become a little bit sad that our education ecosystem has become so toxic that opinion could not be expressed by any professor who simply felt it and wanted to talk about it publicly. That blows my mind, to be honest, because that's tame considering some of the opinions that I've expressed publicly. And I have no fear for what people might think. Now, what is it about higher ed that causes opinions that are critical of that system in that way needs to be hidden? I'm interested if you're in a higher ed position. I've heard from many folks out there in the audience that are in higher ed who thank me for saying things that they can't say. Where is this coming from? That's a genuine question to my professor friends. I don't know where that's coming from. Not to say that I don't believe that it's a real issue. I would love to have that explained to me. The professor goes on. The more I get into the higher ed world, I find that there are 2 types of people who become professors. The kind who want to make music education stronger, change the profession, move us all forward, and those people who tend to be good at their jobs, or at least have redeeming qualities despite lack of K-12 experience. And then there's the other type, the ones who couldn't hack it in the classroom, or felt they needed something higher because they didn't get the high school job that they thought they were entitled to. Oh my goodness, the tea. And there is so much more tea in this article, but that is, again, dead on, and a criticism of a system that should be expressed because we've all seen it. The response to this article has also been incredible in that it's stirring up conversation about things that people have noticed and wanted to talk about for a long time. Now, to that comment about the two types of professors, the type that are really, really good and trying to make a difference and have impressive skills, and then there are the people who weren't good enough to progress along or weren't able to get, for whatever reason, the job that they thought they were going to get, and going back for the extra degrees as a way to earn that instant clout. We've all known those people in our profession. So pretending that they don't exist for politeness sake, I guess, is not productive, especially when kids' educations are hanging in the balance. Now, I did add a third type because I feel very strongly that this is a growing portion of the higher ed landscape, but I added a third type, which I call activist. My definition for that is no interest in pedagogy or learning outcomes, or definitely no interest in proving that the pedagogy leads to better outcomes. They just care about political outcomes. What do people think, say? In what direction are they moving society and culture? That's a type of professor. Now, this professor thinks that third type is in the minority, and that could be true. But as we all know, being an activist typically means you might be in the minority, but you are loud and regularly communicating your dogmas. So this is a really, really interesting conversation. I encourage everybody to go read both of these articles by Odell and the anonymous professor and join this type of conversation, because Substack has ended up being a great platform for the conversations that people have kind of lost trust having over Facebook because of its algorithm for pulling in conflict and arguments. Substack is really good for that. So head over to choralosophy.substack.com. Subscribe for free to the newsletter and Choralosophy community blogs. They will not spam you. It's not going to be like a regular solicitation type of a thing, but we will only reach out with that email, that blast, whenever there is new content for you to see and participate in the conversation. Thank you all for listening to this episode. As always, the way that we keep Choralosophy moving into the future. We just hit 5 years, and the way we hit 5 more years and continue to grow and expand, the way that this platform can be valuable to you, the listener, and can continue to be valuable to the music education landscape is you being involved. The ways that you can be involved, of course, are entering the Choralosophy promo code at all the websites that allow that. They are amazing partners that have been with us mostly since the beginning. That's SightReadingFactory.com, MyMusicFolders.com. That is also EndeavorPublishing.com and GraphitePublishing.com. You can also, of course, go over to Ludus and check out their products. You can do the things directly for the show that help, like go to patreon.com/Choralosophy and chip in $3 a month. And if you can't do any of those things, I just want you to join the conversation. So head on over to the Choralosophers Facebook page, like, share, leave comments anywhere that you're able to see the content. Those help other people join the conversation as well. We are building a movement here, and we want you to be a part of it. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.